of the board, Stephen Prince.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Patriotic Millionaires Annual Spring Meeting. I'm Morris Pearl.
And I'm Stephen Prince. The theme of this year's meeting is American Agenda, the money part. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in America right now, and we thought it was important to focus people's attention on most of it. When you get down to it, it really is about money. Money, 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 money. That's what it's all about.
The Patriotic Millionaires have been working together since 2010, when 56 millionaires signed a letter to Congress demanding higher taxes on millionaires like us. Not because we're altruistic, mind you, but because we're greedy for a different kind of country than we have right now, and we have to fix the tax code to get that. 4 years after signing that letter, I quit my job at BlackRock, full-time with the Patriotic Millionaires.
Morris, why'd you do that?
I did that because I could see then that we had structured our economy in a way that was destabilizing the whole country. And I want to fix it. I want my kids, and now my granddaughter too, who just turned 4, to have the same opportunities that I had, or even better opportunities. And I decide if I want a safe, stable country for my family and me to live in, I need to do something about it to help make that happen.
The Patriotic Millionaires focus on 3 basic tenets. Raising the wage floor so that someone can make a living that they can actually live on, a livable wage. Reforming the upside-down tax code so that working people aren't carrying the burden while the millionaires and the billionaires and corporations are getting off scot-free. And making sure that everybody in America has a reasonable amount of political power rather than just we rich.
Livable wages, effective tax code, equal political representation for all.
Seems pretty straightforward. What's the problem?
What's the problem?
Well, Morris, the problem is mostly we rich white guys. We're the problem. Rich old white guys who've had enough power for enough time so that we've been able to restructure the tax code so that it benefits all flow to us. Or is it us? Anyway, you get what I mean.
Well, that's right, Stephen. Things really got going wrongly in the 1980s with the Reagan Revolution.
That was a weird revolution, wasn't it, Morris? I mean, the rich overthrew the poor. Is that the way it's supposed to work?
It was pretty crazy, but it lasted through 6 presidencies. Yeah, even Clinton and Obama. It doesn't even matter what party's in charge. A smaller and smaller group of people are getting richer and richer. And most people aren't getting enough. And of course, everyone in America is ticked off, and they're right. They ought to be ticked off.
And I got to tell you, Morris, the Reagan reverse revolution really didn't think the whole thing through. You see, the way they structured the economy, mostly through the tax code and labor laws, makes the economy generate so much inequality that it threatens democratic capitalism as we know it, the thing that made you and me rich in the first place. And Morris, I want to admit something to these people here in person and watching on live stream.
What's that?
I like being rich. I really do. And I hope to be rich for a long time. In fact, I might even get a little richer before it's all over with. But the parties, both of the parties, are beholden to enough of the wrong people with their money, and their bad ideas are at risk of killing the golden goose. It can't last. We can't go on like this forever. It's horrible for life, and it's horrible for business, I would contend.
And when President Trump took office, there was this brief moment of hope that he was so indebted to America's working class for his victory, he might actually raise their wages and then help them get a fair share of the proceeds of business. And America would have a stable consumer base. After all, the government is the lead negotiator for working people in this country, and Trump considered himself a great negotiator. President Trump could have made a deal so that 50 million working people would get a raise. He did not do that.
And then I thought when President Biden took office that he could find 51 votes from his own party to fix a tax system that's indefensible. And that has been a growing threat to democratic capitalism since Ronald Reagan. But they couldn't even get enough votes to close the carried interest loophole, which is one of the most egregious, absurd laws on the books, in my opinion. That's why last year the Patriotic Millionaires launched the Great Economy Project to take our message directly to the most powerful constituency group in America, working people across the political spectrum. You see, we believe that working people in America have the power to get the economy they want and the economy they deserve. Anyway, regardless of what political party is in charge, we've got to fix this thing, and we can't let the people continue to be distracted by the shiny objects that continue to be thrown at them.
In magic, misdirection is a form of deception, which the performer draws the audience's attention to one thing to distract it from another thing. Masterclass is the key to misdirection is the audience isn't even aware of it, and they feel their attention is exactly where they want it to be throughout the whole performance.
The next time you hear a politician spouting off about defunding the FBI or critical race theory, I want you to think about that magician. And remember, they are trying to distract you, and they're winning. It's succeeding. They're trying to turn your attention away from the one thing that matters the most to them: money, 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 money.
We started the Great Economy Project in North Carolina, where we had seen this strategy in action. Remember that famous transgender bathroom bill thing? It was not about bathrooms. In Charlotte, they wanted to raise the minimum wage in that city to above $7.25, the current state and federal minimum wage in North Carolina. The Chamber of Commerce did not want them to do this. The state lawmakers took an anti-worker bill that had not passed in years, and they wrapped it up with a transgender bathroom bill to distract everyone, to get those few more votes from a few right-wing religious people, and they actually passed that. They turned their attention away from the higher wages they could have gotten and toward a small group of people that they felt made an easy target.
So we're just wrapping up our first Great Economy Project program in Whiteville, North Carolina. We invited the whole town to be a part of it, and eventually about 60 of them signed up. This group is made up of Republicans, Libertarians, Democrats, and the group that I find the largest anymore is I Hate Them All. Over the course of several months, Kat Hadley, whom you'll meet in a minute, brought these great folks from all kinds of different backgrounds together over dinner with economic experts, and I was one of them, but I was not an economic expert, and some of our members. We shared with them what we know about the economy and asked them to share with us what they want and what they need for their families to thrive.
And we are excited to share with you a sneak peek into a documentary we are making, well, DL's making, about what's happening in Whiteville with the Great Economy Project.
We hope you will join us in taking the Great Economy Project across the country. Working people and millionaires like us can have the right country we want if we get the money part right first. Our next stops are Richland Center, Wisconsin, and Scottsdale, Pennsylvania. Our first online program starts June the 7th.
To learn more, to bring the Great Economy Project to your community, go to AmericanAgenda.com.
So let's take a look.
Big time sunshine today over the hometown and Columbus County's own cool 103.9 FM.
Did we get it? No. Just take your time. She smells good.
Morning. Y'all want to get paid in free dinner? Come talk about the economy, what's working and not working. Morning.
You want to get paid to come talk to us about the economy?
It's terrible.
Yeah, we want to hear about it.
You can just show up and say it's terrible. Think about it. If you're interested, free dinner as well.
No. No.
When we first got here this morning, it was kind of hard to get people to engage with us. They just thought we've been compared to a timeshare company.
What do you think about the economy?
Like it's bad.
Yeah, you want to come complain about it?
I'm here with the Patriotic Millionaires, and we're working on the Great Economy Project in Whiteville.
Morning.
I think people just don't really expect to be listened to about the economy. I think people are just like so fed up with it.
Got a nuclear device. That's the fastest way to do it.
Okay.
I think he suggested nuking the Capitol.
What party are you affiliated with?
We are affiliated with neither. We are focused on building a group of Americans that want to make the economy work for everybody and not just the rich people that control everything. You like the sound of that?
Yeah.
You want to sign up?
Yeah.
Welcome, welcome.
Hi,
Get
kids.
your name
Thanks
tags.
for coming.
If you see your name tag, feel free to grab it. If you want to fill this card out, we appreciate you being here.
I am the founder and president of the Patriotic Millionaires. And the Patriotic Millionaires is a nonpartisan group of very high net worth Americans who basically feel like the economy is not working. It's not working for the vast majority of Americans, and it's creating a country that is divided. And so they feel really strongly, as do I, that something has to change, and it has to change pretty quickly before everything falls apart.
Frankly, anything that I hear that has the word patriotic in it, associated with an organization, makes me a little nervous.
I feel like if you're not a working person earning wages, this shouldn't be the meeting for you.
I'm really just afraid of what the country's coming to in the shape it's in right now.
Most of the people in this group, how can I say this nicely?
You don't have to. You can just say it. I'd rather you just say it authentically.
They don't seem to have a clue what I'm talking about. They're really kind of here for the dinner. To get paid $50, you know. That's what they're thinking, free meal and $50. So for me, it's something much more.
We just had a really rough election cycle, and I was feeling pretty defeated about it. And this helped kind of combat that, and I didn't expect it to.
Over the course of the next few months, we're going to share our perspectives with each other to help us learn and understand, what do you think about all of this stuff? How does this system work for you? Does it not work for you? How do y'all engage with each other to try to get the things in your communities that you need?
How are you? Good. Good. Well, everything is going up and up and up. Wages are not going up. Poor person goes in there and they check every price and they think, well, I've got to go here because it's on sale. It is exhausting and it's kind of pisses you off. It really is a struggle to get out there and feed a family, and people that's got 4 and 5 kids, I don't know how in the hell they make it.
And I am not anti-cash. I am not anti-rich. Let me tell you, I've been broke and I've been rich, and I like rich a lot better.
Yes, sir.
We're anti-unfairness.
How you get
And what we got in America right now is unfair.
We're not going to talk about funding or not funding the police. We're not going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about money. Wait, what are we going to talk about? Money. Wait, what? Money. Right. We're going to talk about money.
When I look around at people who looked a lot like I did 20, 30 years ago, their future looks pretty bleak.
I don't even make what the lowest tax bracket makes. Maybe $18,000 a year, if that.
I've been working steady for 4 years, and I've got stuff in the pawn shop right now.
If anybody was really listening, they would realize you cannot make a living on $7.50 or $7.25 an hour. Nobody can.
I've had opportunities that just don't exist anymore, and I want to know what I can do, what we can do together to try and fix this.
Y'all have a mix of party affiliations across this room. You're really all over the map. If you want to raise taxes on billionaires, raise your hand. You have more power than they do if you use it.
This community is mostly small businesses and, large farm owners, and some people proudly displaying their preference. I did vote for Trump because I'm a conservative, and I'm generally not a huge fan of the man himself. But I miss my retirement account being what it was. I'd like to do the chicken salad. Grilled or fried? Grilled. Good.
So Jamie, why did y'all decide to do this?
I've always heard that, we got to tax the wealthy, they're not being taxed enough, blah, 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 and this will take care of all our problems. I didn't believe that, But to find out that there are many of them that haven't paid tax in decades.
Have no intention of paying in the decades to come.
Billions of dollars, but no
Yeah.
tax paid, period. I'm like, that's wrong. I didn't realize the system was that corrupt.
So the group that we have going is about 2/3 Republicans and about 1/3 Democrats or independents.
The group I'm in? Oh, I would have thought it was largely the opposite.
And we want to walk out of tonight with a group of people who have said, yes, we want to take the next step.
I don't want to sound negative on it, but I know this community fairly well, and there's a sense of despair here that's pretty deep. I mean, they certainly want it done, but as far as getting them to do the work that's necessary, that's going to be a task.
It's kind of a moment of truth because it's been educational, but now it's like, now what? Do you really want to be part of something bigger? And we may come up against what you described. We may come up against that despair.
If we could get working people to demand the economic changes that they agree on in a really forceful way, it would transform the country.
All the research says to change the main population's thought process on critical issues, you need 3% of the population to believe it to their core. That's it. It's not 60, it's not 50, it's 3%.
There actually has to be a difference in how people are thinking about this, because that's where it's going to begin. That is the basic right there.
I think you'll be a very valuable member of this if you should say that.
I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just saying it. You hear what I'm saying? What is the population of Whiteville?
5,600.
What is 3% of that?
168.
168 people. If we can get 168 people who actually believe, but also understand.
If you would put it on a billboard, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're trying to do, come to the meeting.
Something like that I think could really be effective at just bringing a bunch of people.
Door knocking party. Raise your hand if you would be willing to get together here and then all fan out all over town and everybody has to knock on 20 doors.
Miss Erica, we get shot for stuff like that.
I don't want anybody to get shot.
I'm not going to go, but I ain't going to jail.
Festivals and fairs. We could really have some booths there and really promote and some banners.
North Carolina deserves to do better, And so I think that that's going to be the next task. And however we want to get there is fine, but we really hope that you guys are considering those next steps.
Hello?
Hi, is this Pam?
Yes, it is.
Hey, Pam, it's Kat from Patriotic Millionaires, the Great Economy Project.
Yes, ma'am.
We were just wondering if you guys were still interested in being part of the project. We put out this survey that was, would you want to stay on? And I was really hoping that maybe we'd get 5 or 10 people that were like, this is my jam. I really want to do this. We had over 90% of people say that they wanted to stay and continue to work on this. That's huge.
That's great.
And I'm kind of excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, this is where the folks are.
Let me give you one. Read it over, if you don't mind, ma'am. Well, we're standing outside the Republican convention tonight. We'll see how it goes. It's got to get started.
Can we give you one of our flyers for the Great Economy Project?
Hey, can we give you one of these? Sorry. This is not about tonight's meeting. It's a nonpartisan organization. We just want to try to get people involved in getting a higher minimum wage for everybody. Okay? Thank you.
Raise the taxes on the rich and lower it on the poor.
We need that.
These poor people out there are getting screwed and ain't getting kissed.
Looking good, Johnny. What you up to?
Well, I'm up to about 5'7".
You want some free chicken and barbecue tonight? Come over there and eat with us tonight.
Well, I might do that.
2 full-time incomes, we can't make it. We need our pay rate increase drastically, like today, now.
We're trying to get the wages up. Come and join us at our meetings.
Well, how do you feel about the minimum wage in this community?
You can't even feed yourself. Much
A week's paycheck don't even fill up your tank of gas and buy groceries.
If you're talking about taxes and
Right
money,
there.
right? I'm a
Preach.
Democrat,
Preach.
but I'm gonna be.
But if a Republican is trying to improve,
Then I'm gonna vote Republican. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah.
We're trying to make a change for North Carolina.
I do vote Republican, and wages will be a concern for me.
All right, well, we're talking about how minimum wage has been the same since 2008, $7.25.
The Republicans, yes, Republicans should raise the minimum wage.
We want to put the people in the House that are going to do the right thing for us, regardless of which party they are.
I don't care what your political party is. This is about money and taxes. So
Helping our country be
that's
a better
it.
place.
The long-term effort of this program in like a 10-year or however long scale is that these people can reclaim that ownership of the power that they have, but they've been told their whole lives that they don't.
You got rejected? No, he took one. But he said he was from South Carolina, so it probably wouldn't do no good. I told him we were going to be in South Carolina later anyway.
Please welcome the moderator of today's forum, Jamal Simmons.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. Don't leave me up here by myself. I want to thank everybody so much for being here. I'm Jamal Simmons, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. It's been a while since I was at a Patriotic Millionaires event. I think the last time we did one of these, we were on Zoom right after because of all the pandemic rules. And since then, we've gone from doing Zoom. I went to the White House for a year, was the Vice President's Communications Director, and got a chance to travel around the country and see firsthand the amount of kind of hope and investment that I think people have in trying to see people who are trying to fix their problems, but also watching them know they're losing ground. Right? And so they're looking for their leadership to help them figure out how to make that ground up. And so this meeting is something I hope, and this group is one that I hope is going to help us figure out how to help folks make up the ground that they know that they're losing in the country. So I can't wait to hear the insights from the Great Economy Project. I want to thank Morris and Stephen for having me back. And also our fearless leader, who is not here with us today, sadly, Erica Payne. You may have heard Erica is at home with her kids recovering from COVID. So we want to send her our best, and if you have her info, send her a note and wish her well. And tell her that we did a good job, so we get invited back again. So it looks amazing. Let's dive right in. I'd like to call up our first panel. Let's bring up the campaign manager of the Great Economy Project. Where is Kat Hadley? Come on, Kat. Right there. And then Sarah Anderson, the Global Economy Director at the Institute for Policy Studies. And Dr. Caitlin Henderson, Senior Research Advisor at Oxfam America. I'm going to move over here. Let's see, is this on? There we go. So the first question here is going to go to Kat. Kat, I understand you have a real personal connection to the work. And so would you mind telling us about that connection and about your vision for the Great Economy Project?
Yeah, and tell me if I start yelling. I can be a microphone yeller sometimes. Okay. Yeah, well, so excited to be here. So my background, I was a high school dropout. I had a rough childhood, and I had to work minimum wage. And part of this project that I'm really drawn to is helping people get that higher wage, because I remember working 80 hours a week and barely being able to pay rent. And I think that the America that I believe in is not one where that happens. And so yeah, I got lucky enough to get tapped into support and return to school, and now I'm a Truman Scholar, and able to do this. Thank you. Able to do this really incredible work, and I love it. My vision for this is that we build a movement where working class people take their power back. It's not about giving them power, it's about reminding them this is the power you've always had. I know for myself it's really empowering to have an understanding of data to back up your lived experience, because it's really easy to blame yourself when you can't make ends meet, and to feel isolated, and to feel shame when you have to pay with a food stamp card, or shame when you're trying to use Medicaid to get your kids enrolled. And I think that this program aims to build back that sense of pride and give people a living wage that they deserve every day. So that's my long-term vision for this. Yeah.
All right, very good. So can you just tell me real fast before we move on how you guys found Whiteville? I mean, we're trying to talk to Trump voters. We ended up in a place called Whiteville. So when this was first introduced to me, I thought, is that a real place? Is that real? Or is that just a euphemism for something? But tell us a little bit about how you found the community.
Sure. So we knew we wanted to be in North Carolina. We weren't sure exactly where. We knew we needed someplace that was fairly walkable, although you could see the audience not so into door knocking. That's okay. We're working on it. And so we wanted someplace with a reporting staff that had a paper, that had an active presence. And we were doing research, and we stumbled across Whiteville. And I remember Erica and Izzy at the time, and I all went down to this trip, and it was just perfect. Like, we drove through and we're like, this is it. This is the community. We can sense it here. This is a community where there's, the ribbons on every door, and there's a sense of pride in this community, but there's also, we know that people are economically impoverished, and so this is the area we want to lift up and rebuild that working class, and this is where we start. So that was how we kind of fell on Whiteville.
All right. So Sarah, I hear you were the first speaker to the Whiteville group. What did you talk to them about?
Yeah, I was asked to talk about CEO pay and the huge gap between CEO and worker pay. And I'm from a town a lot like Whiteville, except it's in Minnesota, so you're more likely to find lutefisk on the menu than the oyster stew that they have at Dale's seafood restaurant in Whiteville, which is where they hold the meetings. And so I had a hunch that I was going to find a lot of common ground with people, because when I go back to my hometown in Minnesota and talk to people about CEO pay, I find that across the political spectrum, people are outraged. But this was North Carolina. I don't know North Carolina, so I prepared pretty hard for this. One thing I did was I made sure that I was ready for all of the arguments that you might have ever heard in favor of these huge CEO paychecks. So I gathered all that research, things like, it's a pay for performance system, or, their pay reflects how limited the pool is for these talented CEOs. That was all a waste of time. Nobody brought up any of those kind of arguments. But the other thing I did to prepare was I tried to make sure that I connected with people through stories and through shared values. So I started out by talking about my father, who ran a small retail shop on Main Street in my hometown, and the values that he had about hard work and treating his employees and his customers with dignity. And I pointed out that he started his business the same year Sam Walton started his business. And then I kind of traced the history of these two businesses, my dad's little clothing shop and Walmart, and how Walmart had really pursued this model over the decades of funneling resources to the top and really on the backs of workers and their communities, and how they'd squeezed little shop owners like my father, but also bigger companies like Levi's. I don't know if you remember, Levi's got a deal to sell their jeans through Walmart. That's when they closed down all their U.S. production, moved it to other countries where workers were even more exploited. But the CEOs of companies like Levi's that sell through Walmart have done really well. So I think through these stories, I was able to lead people into a conversation about how this CEO pay issue that they all kind of understood instinctively, how it's part of a bigger systemic problem and dealing with our trade policies, our labor policies, and so forth. And I just remember asking, well, what do you think would be the ideal gap between CEO and worker pay? And Thomas, who's in the film over there, immediately piped up, Republican, and saying 5-to-1. Anything bigger than 5-to-1 is unacceptable. And almost every head in the crowd nodded. And as you know, among the big companies, the average is more like 350-to-1. So I really enjoyed my time in Whiteville, and I see tremendous potential there.
You know, we heard from one of the gentlemen in the film, the trailer. He talked about despair. Did you get a sense of despair when you were there, or anger, or what was the emotional context?
I think there's anger, and I have sensed this in my conversations about CEO pay for decades now. Everybody's upset about it, but most people also think there's nothing you can do about it. And so I do think it's really important to have people feel their power. Obviously, raising the minimum wage and other pro-labor things are critical, but there's a lot you can do on CEO pay too. And I would just mention that the debate on this has really shifted. The chairs of 3 Senate committees right now, Senate Finance, Budget, and the Labor Committee, are all in favor of some form of tax incentive to narrow the gaps between CEO and worker pay. The Biden administration is also bringing the power of the public purse to this issue. We can put conditions on all this money that goes to companies through contracts and subsidies, and they just announced recently that the subsidies going to semiconductor companies to make semiconductor chips in this country, it'll be hard for them to get those subsidies if they don't agree to not do stock buybacks, which is just a way to siphon money from worker wages to inflate the value of CEOs' stock-based pay. So some things are happening, and I think we need to really convey to people that there are things we can do to solve these problems.
And Caitlin, you've been looking at the best states to work in. Tell us about your time down there.
Yeah, so I went down to talk a little bit about the labor component to the community in Whiteville. And what was really interesting is I started by asking everyone in the room, what makes a good job? How would you define a good job? What is needed? And everyone in the room started sort of yelling out these things. A really strong wage, paid time off if you get sick or if you have a child, a fair and fixed schedule so you know when you have to go to work and they don't change it on you last minute. The ability, and a couple people even said the ability to join a union, which was interesting considering the sort of political makeup of the people that was in the room. And then of course there were things like retirement benefits, etc. So the reason I really wanted to start with the question, what makes a good job, is because incredibly, those are all the policies that we track in Oxfam's Best States to Work Index, which is ranking all 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico on how they support workers and working families. So what was really interesting to me was that everyone in the room in Whiteville was essentially naming the policies that we track. But unfortunately, the news that I had for the community members in Whiteville is, well, North Carolina ranks last on our index because none of those policies exist in North Carolina at the state level. There is not a minimum wage above the federal minimum. There is no paid leave. There is no law mandating fixed and fair scheduling. There is not, it is a right to work state, so unionization is not protected. There's very, very weak unemployment supports, etc. So this was really the point, was to just sort of start the conversation and also to demonstrate that this is not a partisan issue. Everyone in the room agrees that you need to have a strong wage. Everyone in the room agrees that if you get sick, you should not be penalized by missing a day of pay just because you're not feeling well. That's unfair. And everyone in the room agreed that it's not okay for your boss to give you less than 24 hours notice for you to have to come in and work a shift, especially if you're taking care of children. And I'm talking to a room full of people who are caregivers. Maybe they're a grandparent, maybe they're not. but the care issue is really important to the community as well. So really demonstrating that this is something we all agree on, and also that these are policy choices. None of these things are inevitabilities. One of the things that we talked about that really connected with community members was, if you work at, say, a Burger King in Whiteville, you're making, I think we even called the Burger King, Kat did, and I think they pay about $9 an hour, which is, to be fair, above the minimum wage in North Carolina. And then we called a Burger King in a similarly sized town in Washington State, where the minimum wage in Washington State is above $13 an hour. So we had a conversation with the community members there saying, it is the same job. The item, the commodity, is the same price. There is no reason you should not be being paid more. These are just unfair realities, but they are choices. This is not an inevitability, and you, the community members, have so much power to help influence what the choices are.
So you all had these conversations. People got invested in the history of how we got to this point. What is your answer, Kat, when they say, what do we do about it?
Well, we organize. So, like last week, we had members out handing out flyers at the circus. You saw some of them at an alligator fest. These are folks that are taking time out of their day to spread this message, and they want to build a movement. And so our job is to give them the tools to do that. And, I think in modern times, it's really easy to want a viral moment. It goes and it catches fire, and then this is different. But what we need to do is take our time and build a movement where people can ask questions, people can learn, people can grow. And so that's what's on the horizon there, and then expanding it. We're really grateful to the members that have helped us. We're going to be in Scottsdale, PA, and Richland Center, Wisconsin soon, and also online. And we just have to build it bit by bit. And the great thing is that these people are motivated, and so these are the people that in 10 years could be running for office. We could have allies already. These are the people doing the work and spreading this message for us. And so it's just giving them the tools to really take that power back and keep building that movement with us. And one thing I'll say is that the Patriotic Millionaires has done an amazing job over the last years, really trying to go top down, spreading the message. They're going to be on the Hill tomorrow talking to elected officials about raise taxes on me. And that is essential and so important. But we also have to have this be bottom up. And so this is us approaching, and then we're going to meet in the middle and then, change the world.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for being here. This was a very good conversation, a good panel. You guys are doing a lot of good work down there. We got a whole rest of the session to learn more about what's going on in Whiteville, and we will get back to you all in 1 minute with more folks. Thank you for being here. A lot of equipment to manage here. Now, to discuss the role of films in social changes, please welcome the filmmaker of The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales and Patriotic Millionaire, Dr. Abigail Disney. Come on up, Abby. The multi-Emmy Award-winning CEO of Ish Entertainment, Michael Hirschhorn. And the director of the film that you saw the trailer from, Patriotic Millionaires Go to Whiteville, D.L. Anderson. Great. So, Abby, I have a confession to make to you. Is this on? That's it. 1, 2. All right, great. I have a confession to make to you. No, last week was spring break. I took my kids to Disneyland. And I know that you have been focused a lot on what's going on that's wrong at Disneyland. I couldn't fight it.
Nobody can. The right wing keeps trying to boycott us, and they can't get their people to do it.
It is true. But it is obvious that the park has figured out how to separate adults from their money as much as possible in the course of the day or two that you may spend there. The question is, how much of the people who are working there are benefiting from how much me and my family pay to participate?
I mean, The company is a fundamentalist in the sense of the way they've absorbed the lessons of Wall Street in the last 50 years. So every penny that comes in gets driven as far upward to shareholders and management as it possibly can, and with the minimum possible heading to workers and people, and the expenses of upkeep and things like that. But more than anything, it's the way the workers are treated. I don't chide people for going because I understand what it means to families. That's why I actually work so hard at trying to hold this company accountable, because it's an American institution that, like, try to imagine this country without it. It breaks my heart to think about. We need to save it from itself. And it's a self-devouring mechanism right now. So they did just 2 weeks ago, and I like to take some credit for this, give a 30% raise to about half of the workers down there in Orlando. It's huge. But, you know, it's not just about pay, it's about the way people are treated and the way people are seen. So when I tell people when they do take their families to Disneyland or Disney World, to just say to every single person they see that works there how much you love them and appreciate them for what they do. Because, you know, at the bottom of it all, it's about human dignity. And pay is one way of reflecting that you respect a person's dignity. And it's probably the biggest, most important, obviously most visible one. But there are 150 other ways. I just got a text from a worker saying, well, we always knew that this 37% hike would come with layoffs and with other tightening. And they're given 10 minutes to walk to their lunch break area, 20 minutes to eat, and 10 minutes to walk back. And they all just got a memo saying, you get 5 minutes to walk and 5 minutes to walk back. That's the kind of petty, nasty, mean-spirited thing that happens always right next to a pay increase. And it speaks so much to the way management sees and understands who those people are who do that hourly work. They need to be seen as their equals.
So you call your film The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales. So tell us why you think the American Dream is a fairy tale.
Well, I mean, you know, my grandfather and my great-uncle, you know, were born, you know, in the Midwest, absolutely no money, you know, nothing to speak of. But, you know, every door of opportunity was open to them. There were white men, first of all, you know, and that made it easier to get access to things like credit and real estate and hiring and lots of other things. And so, you know, the path was hard. They worked hard. They lived, ate, and breathed that company repeatedly. My grandmother told me that when she brought my father home from the hospital in 1930, they came home in a big house to a big car to a big house, and she wasn't really sure where their next meal was coming from, because they had leveraged up everything they had over and over and over again. That's the American dream right there. It's digging really deep, except that that's not even remotely a possibility for most people who come from the equivalent of where they came from. You know, our public school system is bankrupt. And if you want to go to college, you know, then dig yourself a debt hole you'll never dig out from under. Every single avenue out and up has been cut off for people. And they're living, you know, lives of quiet desperation.
Yeah. Michael, your film from 2020, Kill Chain, anticipated the crisis in democracy that we saw in 2020 through the lens of election security. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this was a film that came out on March 23rd, 2020 on HBO. That was kind of unfortunate, and it was built around a Finnish hacker named Harri Hursti, who had been dealing with Russian disinformation his entire life, and he had a theory that we built the film on, and actually nobody wanted to fund this film, and I'll tell you how we got it funded, because it's sort of a funny story. This theory that there was going to be a coming crisis in democracy built around elections and election security, and that the Russians had been able to use a specific form of disinformation tactic to kind of undermine faith in elections. And we were focused on electronic voting. We actually did a fair amount of digging into Dominion, which is in the news. And the point we were trying to get across was that it really was never about election security per se. It was about the perception of weaknesses in election security as a kind of wedge and a way to kind of undermine and destroy democratic systems. So anyway, that film came out in, the way we got it funded was nobody wanted to fund us. I was able to get a meeting with the head of HBO, and then Hari hacked into HBO. And so we walked in and said to Richard Plepler, the head of HBO, here's your email. So we not only got the film funded, but Hari got hired as a consultant.
Was that blackmail? Was it light black? Okay.
This is how you have to operate in this world. Anyway, so the film, frankly, didn't make that much of an impact until after the election, when we learned that My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, stole big chunks of the film, took out the context, because this really was, I think, coming from a very deeply pro-democracy lens, and began using it as part of the current campaign to undermine faith in election systems, which was the point of the film itself. Anyway, I think the reason I think it's an interesting story is documentary film, as we saw this morning, is the powerful medium of our time. And actually, Abby has been, almost unique on the progressive side in supporting the type of project that I think tells the stories that need to be told to counter a very right-leaning narrative that's happening elsewhere in the culture. If you look at like Dinesh D'Souza's films or other films of that sort, the right has a very robust system of using documentary film as a way to bring narratives into the mainstream and to really kind of almost invisibly affect the public discourse. So I think there's an interesting discussion that can be had about the role documentaries play, similar to the role op-eds used to play, but in a kind of very different price point, and how crucial they are, I think, for some of the work that you guys are all trying to do.
So as we're thinking about how to go after leveling the field between working people and the elites, when you think about something like election security, when one of the ways people think about going to express their political will is in the middle of elections, how can they have confidence that their political will actually result in the change that they're advocating for?
Well, I mean, the film's case was slightly arcane. It was basically recordable paper ballots, and to have a very clear chain of title to prevent narratives of the sort that led to January 6th from taking hold. And so it was like this very small practical thing that a significant number of election systems in the United States don't have, and as a result, Georgia being a really key example of that, and we spent a lot of time in Georgia, that if there's even the kind of minutest opening for people not to trust that their votes count, everything kind of starts to go to hell, and that's in fact what happened.
DL, you spent some time in Whiteville also, filming. What did you see when you were down there, and did anything surprise you?
I saw a lot of things that were familiar to me as someone who grew up in a town of 2,000 people in Illinois, but under very similar circumstances. I wanted to make sure that people understood the skepticism that was present when an outside group comes in, thinking that they have a solution to offer. And one thing that struck me early on with Kat and Erica was very much this commitment to community-based solutions, that we are going to give you this public education, but it's up to you to decide what to do, because you know your community better than us, and you know how to reach out to them. And as you saw in the cut, people really had to come around to that. I think they didn't trust necessarily everyone in the room. I think there's this belief that everyone in a small town knows everyone, and that might have been true at a certain time, but I was surprised how many people had never sat next to the person and had a discussion about money or politics in a candid way. And I really felt like this was an invitation to do that. And again, that commitment, as you saw, just people saying, okay, they're not leaving, but in fact, we have agency here to decide what to do. And I think that's really powerful to see, and to see that transformation.
Did you find that the presence of the camera made any impact on how people engaged? Or do you have a technique to get them to sort of forget about the fact that you're there?
I think time is always the best element, right? That when you're there long enough, you just disappear. Or we always made a point to introduce ourselves to everyone again and again, and to share a little bit like why we're filming personally, and to make sure they understand this is not an assignment for me. I'm not coming in like to do client work, to make this piece for the Patriotic Millionaires so they can feel better about themselves. I want to know what you really think about this project. What do you really think about the economy? And so I think they certainly began to trust us a lot more. Sarah, who's a producer on the project and has done so much calling and coordinating with them. You know, there's a lot that happens before each and every meeting, and there's a lot that happens when you say, can we please come to your job and film? I think that's a higher stakes thing, as you know. You know, people were scared of being fired to have their cameras around, and it's a tool, and it's also a weapon, I think, when used in certain capacities, and people understand that. Why are you filming me? What is this going to be used for? I think that is a huge barrier that you have to work through, again, with time and trust.
Abby, you chair a group called Level Forward. I'd just love to hear about how you see the work with upcoming artists. It's playing a role in your vision for change.
Right. Well, I just want to congratulate DL, first of all. I think docs are so important because the world happens in 4 dimensions, right? It happens through time. And so what you need to capture is processes, and you really captured a process there, the process by which people came to trust the process and to take ownership of it, and that's why it's really valuable. Level Forward, what we're trying to do is translate an activated value system into every aspect of the filmmaking, because very often, you know, I want to represent the right people behind the camera, in front of the camera. I want the right people writing the screenplay and so forth. We want to do all those right things in the right way. So we pay people fairly up and down the spectrum, all the way to the best boy or girl, depending on the production. And we want to structure our deals so that everybody participates potentially when and if ever there's ever going to be a profit. And so what we're doing is really kind of trying to take a mindfulness approach to every aspect. When people come in from the outside who've been marginalized for a long time, very often they get treated really badly. There's a sort of feeling that they're a little disposable, that maybe we're in the middle of a fad even. We want to invest in people over the long term. We want to build their careers. We want to build their ability to do the next film and the film after that. So that's essentially what we're trying to do.
You know, Michael mentioned this when he was speaking earlier, and I'd love to open this up to any of you. How do you see documentary, or how have you seen documentary having a real impact on public discussion and moving the debate in a direction that maybe it wasn't headed in before the film got done?
I mean, that's a tough one to answer head on. I think maybe without ducking the question, every significant idea and change and transformation can be found in its source, some piece of documentary work. I think the food revolution that's happened, you know, or that's happening in this country is largely a result of a series of landmark documentaries that were made exposing elements of the food system, also sort of introducing veganism and other forms of food. So I think it's sort of it's table stakes for those of you who play poker to have an idea enter into the mainstream. It's not the thing that causes the change. It's the thing that introduces the possibility of change and introduces a new language, introduces new ideas. And I think what was really important about the 10 minutes we watched earlier, what was not in it, right? So you had some people who were very right wing. You had some people that probably are, you know, Democrats. You had black folks, white folks. They were talking to each other, and there was a level of empathy, I think, for everybody involved who DL and Sarah were talking to, that itself is a transformative idea.
I've been doing this for a while now, and I have watched rooms shift in front of me. And, my first film was 72 minutes long, and in 72 minutes, I watched people change. And I was in the Congo, and I had a man come up to me after a screening about a women's group ending the war in Liberia, and he said, I used to think women couldn't really do much of anything. and I just thought, that's amazing. And, you're not going to stay changed like that unless we keep working on you. But what an amazing shift can occur in someone's imagination in a short period of time. But the really important shifts that we need to happen in this world aren't really that measurable. If Martin Luther King walked up to the doors of a pretty average foundation right now and said, it's going to take 20 years, people are going to die, I can't really guarantee this is going to happen or that's going to happen, you're just going to have faith in this, they wouldn't fund him. And the same is true of a lot of films. Like, I make films that are aiming at a deeper change, because what has to change is in the mindset level. And I'm hoping, that with American Dream, we're changing people's ideas about what's possible in business, how it's possible to operate, how it doesn't have to be this way. And sometimes that's the most valuable shift that you can make.
So I've seen this in politics where you have a leader who can, through their language, you talked about, Michael, language, they can capture the sentiment of what people are feeling. They know there's something happening. They don't quite know how to express it. Someone shows up and they have a way of talking about it. That's right. That's what I'm looking for. So I imagine that with film, now it's in the dimensions that you're talking about, right? It's like they hear it, they see it, and there's some expression of how it works out in time. I mean, DL, have you, as you're thinking about making this film, how are you capturing, or how do you think about capturing the language so it's a focal point, a lens through which other people will see the problem in a brand new way?
In large part, I think humor is really important. I think a way to bring everyone down a level and understand that what we're talking about is a problem that we all created, and humans are funny for that reason. And I think I hope that people, when they watch this film, and you all got to hear from people in Whiteville directly in this room, when I was watching that hit me, that these folks didn't really think they'd ever have a platform, and they just got to share their perspective with you. And that's powerful because it was in their words and in their own ideas. And I think I'm always searching for what the ways in which people are filtering and bringing the wisdom, the authority that came from the previous presenters. How do they see that actually reflected in their life? How is Morris presenting on the tax code really getting filtered through Evelyn to share the way that she feels about it? And so I think looking for that filtering, understanding how people are passing it through their own experience, and trusting that that's going to be really relatable to everyone around them.
All right, great. Thank you. DL, Michael, Abby, thank you for being here. All right, so this one is a particular pleasure for me. I've been reading about this guy for a long time. We have not had a chance to meet, but he's one of the most fascinating thinkers, I think, out there looking at these problems. It's my pleasure to introduce the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy at the New School, Derek Hamilton.
Thank you, Jamal, and the accolades are mutual. Unfortunately, Erica is not here, but I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to her and wishing her a speedy recovery. So I'm here to give some remarks about the inseparability of economics, politics, race, or identity group stratification more broadly. Without an understanding and recognition of this, our project, our goal for justice won't occur. So I'll say some sobering things about the realities that we live in, but I'm going to present a pathway that I believe can neuter the fascist lure to that type of divisiveness. So we don't have an adequate social safety net in place. What we have is over 5 decades of deregulation, militaristic investments, and a market revolution that has been supported by a neoliberal vision of supply-side economics under the lure that the structures and government subsidies that center corporate interests necessitates a market dynamism of economic activity that's going to lift all our proverbial votes. But our lived reality is that over the last 50 years, essentially all of our nation's productivity gains have gone to an elite and upper middle class, where effectively flatlining worker wages for everyone else. That's resulted in an obscene, undemocratic, dysfunctional concentration of wealth and power, especially by race, that we haven't seen since the Gilded Age. We know that many Americans, black and brown families in particular, they have low wealth, low income, inadequate health care, work in precarious but essential jobs that have fewer lower place protections, lower wages, and lower benefits. But here's the part I want to get to. It's naive to not recognize that essentially every policy and structure in the U.S. and across the globe is racialized. But that impact of that racialization is by no means limited to black people. Ignorance of a past and existing racial hierarchy under a guise of a forward-looking race neutrality is basically what the sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silver has characterized as a colorblind racism. Racism, sexism, and all the various other isms, they're not simply irrational prejudices, but long-leveraged strategic mechanisms that have been used for exploitation and extrapolation that have benefited some at the expenses of others. And to fully understand how we can have a society where we have an iterative cycle of concentration of both economic and political power, how that can persist for so long, one would have to embrace the third pillar in this relationship, and that's race, or more broadly, identity group stratification with the demarcation of an underclass marked by some subaltern identity. That's the way in which a dominant identity group, like in the case of America, white people, are able to maintain a status quo with a willingness to sacrifice vertical positioning in exchange for horizontal positioning, basically social status. We should recognize that there are economic and psychological benefits associated with distancing from some outgroup. In this case, it would be black Americans towards some in-group, which would be white Americans. That is the impetus for what we call the psychological and material benefits of white privilege or the property rights in whiteness. Although, let's be clear, it's a privilege based on an immoral notion of benefit that is largely predicated on self-interested and tribal norms in which accumulation knows no bounds. An authentic racial coalition to address our growing commonality of inequality would necessitate that the dominant white group give up the benefits of that white privilege. But let's be clear, that's not an easy ask. So as inequality continues to grow both within the U.S. and across nation state, the charge that I have is to get beyond the neoliberal framing that centers markets, personal responsibility, and individual choice devoid of an understanding, an adequate understanding of resource, power, and distribution towards a new thinking, a more moral and fair political economy grounded in human rights and shared prosperity. So we are advancing the concept of inclusive economic rights and the promotion of human rights economies, where economic rights are emphasized as a cornerstone investment in our nation's future and a necessary and inseparable component of human rights. That will be the mechanism to neuter the fascist appeal to white supremacy. This is not new. In the wake of World War II and the dismantling of the Nazi regime, the United Nations General Assembly issued the landmark Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it included economic rights. Human rights were described as universal and related to the maintenance of human dignity, and nation states had a fiduciary to deliver on those rights. There were 5 human rights: civil, political, social, cultural, and the one that we've forgotten is economic rights. And although we have never fully extended these economic rights to black and indigenous people, there's nothing new or radical about the concept in the U.S. In the United States, President FDR in 1944, in his State of the Union address, he called for an economic Bill of Rights. He called for, quote, physical security, economic security, social security, and moral security. He knew that full citizenship demanded more than political rights. It required economic rights. So a 21st century iteration of economic rights will learn from the failures of exclusion from the past by emphasizing, and here's what we mean when we say anti-racist or anti-sexist, by emphasizing that the design, implementation, and management of economic rights need to be intentionally inclusive of all social identity groups, race, genders, ethnicities, nationalities, particularly those that have been most marginalized. We should recognize that the existing distributions, they're products of often racialized, exploitive, and extractive histories. As such, a rebalance of power with public intervention is necessary. The rhetorical illusion and elegance when we use words like freedom and choice and a specific notion of rights, not the economic rights of people, but the economic rights of property, it's a rhetoric devoid of an honest reckoning of the immoral practices by which property has come to be distributed in the first place. It feeds into this proverbial American narrative that we've been talking about, that through hard work and effort, individuals can turn their proverbial rags into riches. We offer individual anecdotes as evidence of the power of effort and free market efficacy, but what is not offered is, in this neoliberal paradigm, is the systematic evidence of the countless cases of hardworking individuals who are not able to attain social mobility, and likewise the anecdotes of individuals born into privilege who are able to maintain that privilege regardless of effort extended or not. So to be clear, this paradigm in our political economy, it has come to naturalize poverty and inequality by castigating it as the result of unproductive and deficient behavior. In other words, subpar outcomes are seen as resulting from personal choices of individuals or communities. That has fueled the rationale for austerity policy. If behavioral modification, particularly with regards to one's self-investments, if that's the central issue, why should we fund government programs and at an international level, international agencies, which at best misallocate resources to irresponsible individuals and at worst create dependencies that further fuel irresponsible behaviors? So we have an alternative. An inclusive economic rights frame turns all of this on its head by locating poverty and inequality as resulting from an absence of resources. That is, poverty and inequality are the result of policy choices, choices that deny people the necessary resources they need to live meaningful lives. The frame calls on government to end poverty directly by placing resources in the hands of people as a right. In essence, without resources, individuals are largely restricted from benefiting from economic markets, and instead they're at the whim of charity or the exploitation of other agents in that market with resources. There's a baseline set of enabling goods and services that are so critical for individual self-determination, without which individuals have limited capabilities of reaping the economic returns to their efforts or ingenuity. And we need public intervention to guarantee these rights to counterbalance accrued economic and racialized private power, which in isolation, economic markets are incapable to redress. Basically, government needs to directly compete and crowd out inferior private options that do not ensure universal and quality health care, housing, schooling, financial services, capital, and the free mobility throughout society without the physical or psychological threat of detention or bodily harms at a state-sanctioned terror because someone's social identity is linked to a vulnerable or stigmatized group. Our current economic system has been founded on a value of self-interested accumulation without bounds, and that has left us vulnerable to greed and exploitation. Growth has become our explicit expression of economic well-being, but in isolation, it fails to adequately capture the multiple dimensions of prosperity, including our human capabilities, morality, sustainability, and our civic engagement. We need measures of economic well-being and policy that center people and the environments in which they live. So as we talk about industrial policy, it should center people in the places that they live. Government has a fiduciary to invest in our most treasured resource, economic resource, and that is its people. And we should learn from the failures of the past that this people-centered physical and human infrastructure package, it should be made permanent, and it should be by design and implementation anti-racist and anti-sexist. Such an approach would trend us towards dismantling the material consequences and the social stigma associated with identity groupings like racism and sexism. If we don't have this potent policy apparatus to provide pathways of economic security and self-determination for all our people, white supremacy and the despotic political appeal for divisive and fascist leadership that leads to concentration at the top, it will always remain. So in closing, here's the call to all of us. Commit to justice. Commit as a matter of faith. Commit simply because it is the right thing to do. Because in the end, it is our economy. We get to choose. We get to define our economy. It is our monetary system to facilitate the economy we want. And ultimately, it is our government that we get to use to help facilitate this vision that we think is inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Hope everybody's awake now after that. One of the reasons I've been fascinated by Derek is because I think he's so willing to tilt himself directly at some of the assumptions that are commonly made. And you don't often sit in a room full of billionaires and hear somebody talk about the impact of capitalism that way. So it's a fun morning. Let's get granular now on what patriotic millionaires think of as the money part. So I'm going to ask you to welcome someone who works with one of my favorite CEOs, Rosalind Brewer, patriotic millionaire John Driscoll, Executive Vice President, President of U.S. Healthcare at Walgreens Boots Alliance. And he is the former CEO of CareCentrix. Joining him is Heidi Scherholz, the President of the Economic Policy Institute. And next to her, we're going to welcome Saru Jayaraman, the President of One Fair Wage. She's also the director, the Director of Economic Justice at Oxfam USA, Nabil Ahmed. All right, thank you everyone for joining us on the next, whoa, I'm losing my notes. All right, get myself together here. Thank you everyone for joining us for this next round of questions. I want to start with John. So John, I understand you raise wages at your company. Can you tell us what interesting results you saw and what you think they might portend for the rest of the American economy?
Well, about 10 years ago, I took over as CEO of an organization. It's about 2,000 people, probably at least 500 of the 2,000 were on entry-level wages. And we froze executive salaries and moved everybody up to $15 an hour a decade ago. And the company was really in trouble. Since then, we've more than quintupled in value. We have the wages are considerably higher than that now. And it literally cut churn by about 50%. It dramatically improved retention. It also improved productivity. If you invest in employees, they'll do great work. I mean, at the bottom line is that paying people a livable wage make us a much more resilient and successful company.
And what did you see in terms of those results? How did they live out over the course of time? Did they maintain themselves, or did you see that things sort of return back to a norm over a period?
Oh, there's no question. There's an increasing return when you invest in your team and your team believes you're invested in them. I mean, we went through some ups and some downs. We actually at one point lost about half of our revenues, and people took voluntary pay cuts to stay with the company, and we've then tripled the size of the company since then. You know, paying people a livable wage is a basic investment in the business. And we had dramatically positive results, and we've won every Great Place to Work competition we've ever entered, and we've gone through some really difficult times. Whether it's through COVID or through losing a lot of revenues, there's no question. It's in addition to being an essential human right, in my view, it was an essential part of our business success.
Great. And Heidi, you've heard John's story. What do you think that means for the rest of the American economy? What lessons should we draw from it?
This is on.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. The economics of this, what you just described, is exactly what happens. The economics of this are really, really known. It's like the effects of increasing the minimum wage on the economy is one of the most studied things in labor economics. And what it shows, the weight of that enormous evidence, is that raising the minimum wage, it raises the wages of low-wage workers, it reduces inequality, it reduces racial wage gaps, it reduces gender wage gaps. It does all of that without causing job loss. And that could be worth actually talking about. How is that possible? The way that's possible is without a strong minimum wage, employers have the ability to suppress wages. They have the ability to set wages below a market clearing wage and shift the extra to excess executive pay, excess corporate profits. So what that means, though, is when you raise the wage floor, stuff doesn't fall apart, right? Like people don't go out, businesses don't go out of business. You don't see a bunch of job loss. And then I will also say that it actually goes even further than this. And John, you kind of got at this, that when you raise the minimum wage, it actually makes the overall economy stronger. And if you look at the neoliberal policies of the last 40 years, including the fact that the federal minimum wage is now 40+% below where it was at its peak, all of that has not just increased inequality, it has made the economy weaker. And the reason it does that is we all know this logic. It's actually economically true that when inequality goes up, you're shifting income away from low and middle income people, who are the ones who are most likely to have to spend that money in their economy. That's particularly true of minimum wage workers. And it shifts income to higher income people, who are the ones who have the luxury to save that money. That slows growth. Inequality slows growth. Minimum wage, keeping weak minimum wages slow growth. If we do things like raise the minimum wage, other things that will make the economy fairer, it won't just make the economy fairer. It will also make the economy stronger, more resilient, faster growing.
And there's some evidence that increasing incomes at the upper end of the band actually makes the economy less stable, because as those people who have that wealth are looking for places to invest, they end up investing in things that become bubbles. And so we see this sort of cyclical threat to the markets that occurs because we don't have enough wage growth at the bottom end of the scale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Instead of having people who have to, instead of having that income go to people who actually need to spend that money on goods and services in their economy to, meet their consumption needs month to month, you have it going to people who are looking for things to spend their money on, and that can create some really perverse outcomes.
But Jamal, it also really undermines the foundation of democratic capitalism. And to go from words to specifics, we got one email when I just took the job of someone who was working out of her car and trying to figure out transportation to daycare. Another email from someone who was trying to figure out how we could help her pay for diapers. I mean, if the foundation of the American economy is based on that, of paying a poverty minimum wage and shifting that responsibility to government, it creates instability throughout the base. And that's not good for America, and it's not good for business.
So, Saru, this is going to turn to you, because I think we've seen, why don't you talk to us a little bit about one fair wage, and also, obviously, what's happening with restaurant workers and the fact that there is this varying amount of wage. They're being left out of the minimum wage in many places.
Yeah, so the restaurant industry, as many people know, has played a really outsized role in the minimum wage conversation for, frankly, a century, since 1919, when the National Restaurant Association was first formed. The National Restaurant Association, which we call the other NRA, was formed in 1919 in response to another industry, the Pullman car industry. Some of you may know there was a company called Pullman. It was luxury trains going from East Coast to West Coast and back. Right after emancipation, the Pullman Train Company hired black people to work as porters, black men to work as porters on the trains. In the early 1900s, those black men, under the leadership of a man named A. Philip Randolph, started organizing for an actual wage rather than living on tips. Tipping had not been prevalent in the United States pre-emancipation. At emancipation, two industries sought to hire newly freed black people, not pay them anything, and let them live on this new thing that had just come from Europe called tips. So Pullman car porters started organizing, said, no, we want a wage rather than tips, and got it. And in response, in 1919 in Chicago, the National Restaurant Association, other NRA, was formed to ensure that their staff were mostly black women that they had hired post-emancipation, didn't organize, and didn't get what the Pullman car porters get, and ensure that forever, to this day, these workers would rely pretty exclusively on tips. So we went from a $0 wage at emancipation to $2.13 an hour, the current federal minimum wage for tipped workers in the United States, and 43 states with a sub-minimum wage for a population that's still overwhelmingly women, disproportionately women of color, mostly single moms struggling to make ends meet on tips. Now, here's the thing I just have to say. We're in a very historic moment right now where for the first time since emancipation, millions of workers are rejecting that idea of living exclusively on tips. Coming out of the pandemic, the industry is facing the worst staffing crisis in its history, and thousands of restaurants are having to raise wages, but they are actually, many of them saying, especially small businesses, we can't do it alone, we need a level playing field, we need policy that's going to bring these workers back, because a lot of the workers have left and are saying we don't trust that this industry will ever produce the wages that we need to live. So the industry actually has the highest ratio of job postings to people of any industry right now in the United States. And it's really kind of, I think, chickens coming home to roost, because the Restaurant Association is now so desperate. They are the ones really, in many states, leading the fight to weaken child labor laws, because they are looking desperately for any new sources of people, knowing that many adults are no longer willing to work for $2.
I find it so interesting to listen to you talk about this. I learned so much about this the first time we did an event together. One of the pieces of mythology that's out there about tipped workers is that it's actually going to deprive people from being able to make a lot of money. Because I think there's like a tiering system. If you're at, a $100 a plate or $50 a plate restaurant, maybe your tips are going to end up being something that are different than if you're at a $15 a plate restaurant. Can you talk to us a little bit about that tiering and how that kind of gets to the mythology of why the tip wage is not fair?
Well, the other NRA has done a wonderful job actually using restaurant workers' money. So I don't know how many of you saw the article we got on the cover of the New York Times in January, where they actually created a scam, where they created a company called ServeSafe and went around to states forcing workers to pay for food safety training, and then used it to lobby against their own wage increases without these workers knowing it. And part of that money was used to create what we call AstroTurf, fake grassroots organizations. That one was called Save Our Tips, was featured on John Oliver last week tonight as a fake grassroots organization that went around in DC and around the country telling workers your tips are going to go away if your wages went up, and promoting the idea that tipped workers are in fact these very high earners. They make $100,000 a year. The overwhelming majority of tipped workers here and everywhere are women of color, single moms, working in very casual. There are casual restaurants here in DC. Maybe we all don't go to them, but there are IHOPs and Denny's here in DC, believe it or not. You can look on your phone, they're here. But there are also casual ethnic restaurants. There's so many restaurants where the majority of people work, and they do not make a lot of money in tips. They struggle. All of this has been part of the 100 years of lobbying and magical misdirection by the National Restaurant Association to get many of us to think that somehow this category of workers should be exempted every time the minimum wage goes up. And I have to tell you that exemption has happened over and over and over again in states like New York and Pennsylvania and here in DC. Every time the minimum wage has gone up, these workers are thrown under the bus, and they're mostly women. They are the pawn that allows the minimum wage to go up for everybody else.
All right. And Nabil, you do this work around international anti-poverty. Can you talk to us a little bit about your interests here in the U.S.?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jamal. Look, so we fight inequality here in the U.S., in 90 countries around the world, countries rich and poor. And here in the U.S., it's a wage that it doesn't look so different to a wage in other advanced economies around the world. Here, it's not just a wage, it's a lifeline. And if I can just break that down for you. For example, across advanced economies, you have a real social safety net. It's far from perfect across many of them, but the state's paying for healthcare. That's not coming from your wage. It's not tied to your employer. You can run through a list. If you're having a baby, you're getting parental cover in Sweden for 480 days. The state's going to cover you after having a baby. All to say that when the state fails to meet your economic rights, you're alone. Wages matter so much more here. And Jamal, there's something else to this piece as well, because wages go to the heart of this Gilded Era inequality crisis that we face today. And you can ask institutions like Oxfam and across this, even the IMF, you can ask them. They looked at how the rich have got richer over recent decades, and they attributed about half of the top 10% getting richer to the decline in unionization and, I would say, the wage theft associated with that. So we're in this conversation to showcase, to put a spotlight on that, and we need to really dismantle some myths, right? Like, one thing that we hear, okay, it's not so great here in the US, but, all advanced economies are doing pretty poorly on income inequality. Wrong, right? This country has the worst income inequality of any advanced economy around the world. And follow me here. The poor income inequality is so severe that the poorest people in the US live poorer lives than the poorest people in a country like Slovenia. So that's a myth we can take on. There's a myth that, okay, this is a problem, but how big really is it? And my wonderful colleague Katie here and teams at Oxfam have done the data to show it's about a third of all American workers are earning under $15. If you look at identity, and Derek mentioned identity and stratification in his speech, if you look at women workers, then that's 40% of all women workers earning under $15. If you're talking Black and Hispanic workers, that's close to 50%. And then if you get to women of color, you're talking a full 50%. And so that's another myth that we need to take. And Jamal, let me finish with this one, because I think we have to talk about language here, because you'll say, well, look, at least it's a flaw. Sometimes we'll hear, right? At least it's a flaw. And it's not really at all, is it? Because when you account for inflation, when you account for cost of living, when you account for the structures in place that prevent you from accumulating wealth, it's not really a flaw. You're standing on quicksand. And I think that's some imagery that we need to bring into this conversation.
When you do the comparison between countries, what percentage of that is wages and what percentage of that is kind of social welfare policy that also exists in the country that supports low-income people?
You're absolutely right. So wages is a massive driver of that. So it's about, if you look at that income increase, it's about half, right? It's about wages. We need to talk about, by the way, Jamal, here, that real attacks on unionization, the rights to organize here in the US and around the world. That's a part of it. And of course, social spending on universal public goods, on healthcare, as well as on quality education, on what we can call cash transfers. That's a massive part of it. And we also need to talk, of course, about tax. And I know we've got a tax panel coming up next.
It's coming.
That's come. And we can talk about this in money, and it is about money, but it's also about power. And this is about a redistribution of income, of wealth, and of power in our economy.
John, you started talking a little bit about the base of the economy. I imagine, since you work for Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company, that you're interested in preserving capitalism, right, and having capitalism work. So can you tell us, as you listen to these conversations, what do you think is important to make sure we have a capitalism that works not just for the people at the top, but also for all the people who work for them?
Well, fundamentally, it is an issue of justice, and a lot of the issues of fairness and justice and related. But the way the system works right now, it doesn't really work well for business. I mean, we're basically telling our entry-level workers, hey, run up the down escalator, and then we're going to increase the speed. I mean, that doesn't work. It creates instability. It creates people having to work two jobs to get 2/3 pay of what a fair wage might be. And by paying a poverty minimum wage, which is what we're talking about here, we're actually just shifting the responsibilities to taxpayers while also undermining our ability to have people focus on what they can do to actually succeed in work. I mean, the American dream is about, with a little bit of success, you can earn a living wage and move up. That creates the engine of democratic capitalism. When you remove that foundation and undermine it, I think you make the entire system of business and democracy unstable. And that I think leads to a lot of the angst, anger, and anomie that drives the wrong kind of politics, which also undermines the ability to run a successful business. So it's not just bad for the entry-level workers, it's fundamentally bad for business. Sarah.
I want to add, it's bad for business and it's bad for democracy because, restaurant workers who are the lowest wage workers in America have a 12% voter turnout rate. And when you ask them why, it's not that they're uninterested or idiots or don't understand how voting matters. It's that they really, as you saw in the Whiteville video, have lost faith in American politics and in democracy. They have seen their wages stagnate at $2 and $3 over multiple generations, not decades, under both Democratic and Republican administrations. So when you work 3 jobs, you're penalized for taking time off of work, your only income comes from tips that you get when you get to work, and you see no impact from voting. Why would you take time out of your 3 jobs to go vote? It makes no rational sense, and we want people to act like rational actors. So we are, for example, are seeing in this moment where workers are saying we want more, the potential to put these issues directly on the ballot in states like Ohio and Michigan and Arizona, where voting makes such a difference. When you put people's issues directly on the ballot, they show you that they actually can show up and then show up on everything else we want them to show up on, from climate change to everything else. So a functioning democracy requires people seeing that their economic needs are on the table, on the ballot, and met before they can actually actively participate as the citizens we want them to participate as.
Yeah, it's so clear that low voter turnout is actually a vote. It's a vote of no confidence.
That's right.
It's a vote of no confidence in the system. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned wage growth as part of economic growth. Why is it important for us to talk about the connection between the two?
Oh, I love that question. I think it's a really important question. I'll back up by saying growth, the pace, unless we're in a recession, the pace of our overall economic growth is not what keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is whether our growth is broadly shared, whether we are seeing inequality halted, whether we are seeing improvements in racial inequality. What I care about fundamentally is fairness. And I think that I am not alone in that, in the progressive movement. And what that means is that we often just talk about the fairness part. We don't also talk about the growth part. And I think we do that at our peril, because when we do not say the growth part, people think we're conceding it. People think that we think, oh, you raise the minimum wage, that's great for fairness, but it is actually going to hurt inequality, like that we're just not saying that. And that gives our opponents power. It gives them something to hang their hats on. I think it's why, like one of the things that makes me the craziest is the fact that when you ask people, and it doesn't matter what demographic group you ask, how you ask it, when you ask groups of people who does better on the economy, Republicans or Democrats, Republicans win by a mile, even though it's just empirically, demonstrably false. People say Democrats are very good on fairness. People say Republicans are very good on the economy. Republicans are better on the economy. So I think one of the things that says to me is we all have to start really, and I know a lot of people in this room do this well, like you do this very well, but we all have to start talking about things like raising the minimum wage, other things that will make our economy a fairer place. Will not just make it fairer, it will also make our economy stronger, more resilient, faster growing.
One thing I have thought for a long time that progressives should be talking about, and we're not going to have a political conversation, but for people who are interested in many of these policies, we talk about the policy a lot. We don't talk about what the result of the policy is. And so we don't paint the picture of what the world looks like if we're successful. And I think we've got to give people something to dream about that's not just, you need to show up and vote, we'll implement this policy, that'll have this percentage impact. It's like, your life will look like this if we win. And so that's my editorial comment for the day. Thank you for the panel for being here. Okay. One more round of applause. Thank you for everyone and for Derek. And I think we're moving along. We have had a very good morning, and we are rounding the bend now into the final presentations. So let's talk about taxes. We've already previewed that a little bit up here. Let's talk about taxes. And what better day to talk about taxes than the week the taxes are due, right? If you haven't filled out your forms, tomorrow's the deadline. So please help me welcome to the stage a senior advisor on tax policy for the Patriotic Millionaires and former trust and estates lawyer Bob Lord. And then with him, Vanessa Williams, Senior Fellow of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institute. And also Amy Hanauer, the Executive Director for the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. All right. So, taxes. Who doesn't love taxes? We all, we can't wait. This is our favorite week. Everybody, fills out all the forms and writes the checks if you have to. It's awesome. But the level of economic inequality in America today is really pretty extreme. And our Gilded Age forebears would be impressed by what we've accomplished in this era. How much that inequality would you say is due to taxes? Tax policy?
I don't know. Am I on, right? Yeah, so. I don't know exactly, but I'm certain it's between 98.2 and 99.6%. Look, it's just math, right? The super rich can grow their wealth at a rate greater than the population as a whole, and that shouldn't surprise us. This is what Thomas Piketty meant when he coined his famous equation, R is greater than G. They can live off of a sliver of their income, and they have investment opportunities that the rest of us will never see. And when a group, especially a narrow group of households, can grow their wealth at a rate greater than the population as a whole, their share of the nation's wealth will get larger and larger and larger over time. And that's what's happened in the last 43 years or so. Can I have the next slide? So when we're looking at let me back up a second. So what we need taxes for is to bring that rate of growth of the ultra-rich after tax back to the rate of growth that the country's wealth as a whole is growing. So that way they're not getting a larger and larger share of the country's wealth. And when we're measuring that, we want to look at what they're paying in tax as a percentage of their wealth. And unfortunately, that data is not available. At least I've never seen it. You know, what the top 0.01% pay in tax as a percentage of their wealth. But a couple of years ago, my colleagues at the Institute for Policy Studies and I developed a way to use the data that Professors Sayes and Zuckman have given us to figure the taxation as a portion of wealth over time comparing one year to another. And what we did is we compared how the top 0.01%, what they're paying in tax as a percentage of their wealth compared to the year 1953. So if you look at this chart over here, the orange line, you'll see 1953 is at an index of 100. And if you go down to the very end, to 2018, you can see that the top 0.01% are paying 17% as a percentage of their wealth as they paid in 1953. In other words, they've had an 83% tax cut in the respect that it matters most as a percentage of their wealth, because that's what matters to them. That's what constrains the growth of their wealth. And if you stay with me for another second here on that chart, if you see that orange line, it drops from 1953 down to about 60%, and it kind of hangs in there for a while until right around 1980. Then look what happens to that orange line after 1980. It just plummets. The blue line is the share of wealth, of the nation's wealth, that the top 0.01% own. And if you go from the 1940s or so all the way to 1980, it hangs in there at, and now we're looking at the column on the right, it hangs in there at about 2%, maybe 3% of the country's wealth. Now, at 2%, they're doing just fine, by the way. They're 200 times as wealthy as the average household. They're doing just fine there. But look what happens as their tax rate starts dropping. Look what happens to their share of the country's wealth. It climbs up to darn near 10%. And this group, this top 0.01%, this is the richest 13,000 or so households in the country. This is a group, it's a population of maybe 35,000 people. You could fit them into a small baseball stadium, and they have almost 10% of the wealth of a country of 330 million people. So going back to the question, you can see how taxation is really 100% responsible for this dramatic change in inequality that we've seen in the last 40 years.
So what do the patriotic millionaires want to do about it?
It's funny you should ask, because we have a solution to this. Can we see the next slide? This is our program to restore a stable capitalist democracy. And it's based on 3 principles. The first one, a tax code in which all income over $100 million is treated in the same manner, regardless of how it's generated. We have
over $1 million.
Over $1 million.
Yeah, he said over 100 million.
So we have this system right now where we basically have placed arbitrary value judgments on what type of income should be taxed how much. And so we have long-term capital gains are taxed at a really very low rate. But insultingly enough, we tax at the very highest rate the income from labor, wages. And it, money is money. And at least in the $1 million plus range, it all should be taxed at the same rate, whether it's capital gains or income from so-called pass-through businesses, which now get this 20% deduction in computing their tax liability, or wages. And we've also proposed that we scrap this estate and gift tax system that just isn't working. It's so loophole-ridden that even billionaires can avoid estate and gift tax entirely. And we replace it with the taxation of gifts and inheritances of over $1 million during lifetime as income. The second principle, a tax code that begins with a full cost of living exemption from income tax and imposes progressively higher marginal rates throughout the entire income scale, going up to 90%, a 90% marginal rate for incomes over $100 million. In other words, a truly progressive income tax. And let me talk for just a second about at the bottom of the scale. Right now we have this thing called the standard deduction, and what it effectively does is allows folks an amount of income up to just about the poverty level to be not subject to income tax. But that first dollar of income over the poverty level, we hit with an income tax. And really, if we're going to have a minimum wage that's a livable wage, we should have that livable wage not pay income tax and only start imposing income tax once we get above that livable wage. And ironically, this is something that you all have our memo on how to tax America in the next 250 years. This little tidbit is something that was put in at the very last minute. I sent an email to Erica Payne, and I said, it's probably too late to put this in, but we should at least start, mentioning this in how we talk. And she said, no, put it in. And so the IRS, when it goes after the folks who have big back tax liabilities, in other words, delinquent taxpayers, and it starts to engage in its collection process to make them pay their back taxes, it actually allows those folks to keep what's really equivalent to a livable wage before they have to pay anything out of their current income in back tax. So like, for example, someone in Maricopa County, a single person with no kids, could get to keep for housing and food and transportation and health care about $40,000 a year before they'd have to take out of that what they owe in back taxes. But someone who's just currently living can only get to about $13,000 a year before they have to start paying current taxes. Which is, it's kind of ironic that we do that. We treat the folks who haven't paid their tax liability better than the ones who are currently paying their tax liability. And lastly, we have a tax code that's expressly designed to rein in wealth concentration. These other proposals we have, they'll do a lot to shrink inequality, but we'll still have folks who just accumulate astonishing levels of wealth that really threaten our democracy. So when we looked at what can we do about this, we went back to how wealth was distributed around 1980. And what we saw is that there were precious few households that had wealth over 1,000 times the median wealth, the typical household, the household that is poorer than exactly half the other households and richer than exactly half the households. And really, If a household has 1,000 times the wealth of the typical household, anything over that's kind of too much. It's kind of more than they'll ever need for living. And really, that's when wealth starts to beget wealth that translates not into living standard, but into power. And so we designed this tax, which we call the Oligarch Act, which stands for, I hope I get this right, oppose limitless inequality growth and restore civil harmony. And we have thresholds for this, and it's a wealth tax. And we start at 1,000 times the median household wealth. Everything over 1,000 times the median household wealth and up to 10,000 times the median household wealth is subject to a 2% annual tax. Between 10,000 and 100,000 times the median household wealth, and now we're getting well into the billions, of 4% annual wealth tax. Wealth between 100,000 times and 1 million times the median wealth, a 6% annual wealth tax. And now we're up at, there's only one person over 1 million times the median household wealth. There used to be two, but now there's only one, Elon Musk. At that level, 8%. And what that will do over time is it will restore a more egalitarian distribution of wealth that doesn't threaten our democracy. And by the way, as this happens, that wealth tax will kind of melt away, where only a few families are paying at the 2% rate and probably none at the higher rates.
You know, I was listening to your conversation, your talking point about how you pay back if they're collecting on you, right? If the IRS is collecting on you, you get $40,000. Isn't it worse that, according to recent stories, that in fact more people are audited if they have simpler tax returns? So people who have businesses and LLCs get audited less than people who are just sending in straight W-2s, because it's easier for the auditors to understand the simple tax returns than to understand the more complicated ones.
Oh, the IRS is so starved of resources that it's almost the only way they can operate, because some super rich person gets gets audited, and they'll hire an army of tax lawyers like me, and the IRS just doesn't have the resources to compete.
It's like the track doesn't just have hurdles, it has divots, right, for the people who are trying to race. All right, Vanessa Williamson from Brookings. Would you characterize this as common sense, radical? Like, how would you think about the plan that you just heard?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly radical, but I think it's also, American is apple pie, actually. So I do a lot of work on tax history, and you mentioned common sense. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about someone many of you probably read about in high school, Thomas Paine, right? He wrote Common Sense, classically. He wrote American Crisis. He was the pen of the revolution, and John Adams said that if he hadn't lifted his pen, then George Washington would have lifted his sword in vain, right? This is writing Common Sense made Americans not only think about being independent from Britain, and thought about being a republic, right? This is one of my favorite of the founders, in case you could not tell. Well, another thing he did in 1792 was come up with a plan, it's in the Rights of Man, that's about a wealth tax, specifically a tax on the income from wealth. Now, I want to be clear that he did not propose the top rate as 90%. No, he proposed the top rate as 100%. So a 100% marginal tax rate on income from wealth. And why, right? What was he looking at? He was looking at the conditions in Britain mostly, because America was a somewhat more egalitarian country on this measure at least, whereas in Britain there were these long-standing estates, and people had so much of the wealth. And he said that the only way to ensure that we dealt with the corruption at elections, this is what he was worried about, the corruption at elections and the extreme luxury that the sort of, the Duke of whatever had, the only way to deal with that was to impose a tax on income from wealth. And he actually, right there in the Rights of Man, which is full of stirring rhetoric as usual, he got a little tax table and everything because he wanted to lay out this idea of progressive taxation, which was then really, really new. And so I think that, when we're looking at the kind of policies that, certainly are radical. Of course, this is a radical and exciting plan. It's worth remembering that there's actually a history of that in this country that goes all the way back to our founding. And I think sometimes we forget that, something as simple as the Boston Tea Party, right? There's been this classic symbol of conservative movements in recent years. The Boston Tea Party was a piece of direct action against a corporate tax cut, right? Taxes on tea were going down. That's what they objected to, right? Because it was special tax break for the East India Company that was, looking like it was foundering, and it was too big to fail. So they the Patriots in Boston decided that they were not going to allow their local markets to be undercut. They were not going to allow this one company to get a special deal out of the British government. And so that's why they, in the middle of the night, did something that is also radical, right? But is absolutely our founding. They engaged in direct action property destruction that, if you're looking for an actual contemporary example, would be something like the water protectors, right? Or maybe the French farmers who knocked down a McDonald's, right? So this is absolutely a radical plan, but this is, at times, quite a radical country.
So do you think people would buy raising taxes?
Oh my goodness, I love talking about this. So, the sort of narrative that Americans hate taxes is very deep set in America, and it has been a conservative project, like a very consciously organized conservative project, to convince Americans that they hate taxes, no matter how much data exists to the contrary. And I sit here with the data, and I'm like, but, and it doesn't matter because there's been this amazing rhetorical campaign on the conservative side to demonize taxation and to convince people that Americans don't like taxes. But here are a few actual data points. So if you ask Americans, is it every American's civic duty to pay their fair share of taxes? The percentage that agree is always over 90%. In fact, only about 6% ever disagree. So if you want a comparison point, how often do only 6% of Americans think something? You have to ask them about whether the moon landing was real, or is Elvis alive, right? This is overwhelming. This is as much consensus as Americans have ever come to on any issue. They think that you have to pay your taxes. It's part of being a patriotic citizen, I guess like many of you in this room. So Americans think taxes are an important civic responsibility. Large, strong majorities have always supported progressive taxation. And here's something you may not know. When people support a flat tax, it's a minority of Americans who support a flat tax. Most people want progressive taxation. But some of them want that flat tax because they think it would close loopholes. And they've heard, that there are millionaires and billionaires and corporations paying nothing. So they're like, oh, if we had a flat tax, we would finally be taxing those rich people, at least to some degree, right? And so that's about 20% of the support for the flat tax is just people who believe that. So yeah, I think that the problem when it comes to raising taxes in America is not a hearts and minds problem of average Americans. You saw in the video, right? I mean, you come to people and you say, raise the minimum wage and tax the rich, and people on every end of the political spectrum are like, these are my favorite things, can we please do them, right? So there's paying taxes can be irritating, although a remarkable percentage of people enjoy the actual process of their income taxes. But I think this would be a much harder fight if it weren't for the fact that most people think these things are good ideas.
So Amy, I have heard in previous focus groups and political campaigns, one thing people are concerned about is feeling as if they're being taken advantage of, that they're paying and other people are getting off the hook. That's one of the things that drives their feelings about taxes for those who don't like it. How do we construct an argument that gets people to sign up for this kind of a tax structure, or is it just a losing fight?
Yeah, great question. Thanks so much. I think Vanessa is raising all of the right points, right? People actually overwhelmingly believe that the wealthy should be taxed more, that corporations should be taxed more. It bothers them that wealthy people and corporations don't pay more taxes. And that's why we can win on this agenda. And we saw wins on this agenda this past summer in the Inflation Reduction Act. We raised hundreds of millions of dollars to be used on preventing climate change and providing health care and funding the IRS to address the exact question that you asked about earlier. So people do want to and feel gratified when we win on these things. And we see it in the states, too. We also see the child tax credit, which drastically reduced poverty nationwide when it was expanded. And we didn't succeed in getting those expansions to be permanent, but where we are succeeding is in states where across the country we see a millionaire's tax that was increased in New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey in recent years, in Washington state where they just increased the capital gains tax first by a narrow vote in the legislature, then defended it on the ballot, then dealt with it being sued and won at the Supreme Court in Washington state. So people want to see this agenda win, and I think on the child tax credit, we're seeing states taking over where the federal government leaves off. The problem that we have to be really concerned about is that our research shows that wealth is very deeply concentrated in this country in a few small states, primarily in the Northeast and in California. Those happen to be the states that have more robust tax codes. So much for the notion that nobody wealthy wants to stay in a state that has relatively higher taxes. And those are the states that are much better able to provide the amenities that enable people to live and thrive and grow, that enable kids to be well educated, that enable an educated workforce. So I think the very connections that Sarah and Heidi and Saru and Derek were talking about earlier today, that this is what makes our economy strong, that this is what enables us to hire skilled workers, that this is what going to be what lets our kids thrive, is part of selling a higher and more reasonable sort of tax regime in this country.
You know, one tax that always seems to pass is a school millage.
Yes.
Right? People say, like, oh, we're going to raise your property tax in order to pay for schools to improve in some way. What is the benefit of the connection between the benefit that's going to occur and the tax that people pay?
Right. So we have to be very careful about treating government like a vending machine, but it is overwhelmingly true. I lived in Cleveland, Ohio for over 20 years, and residents of Cuyahoga County, Ohio, despite being, relatively modest in income, consistently turned out to vote for a human service levy, which didn't necessarily benefit. That was to make sure that the lowest income people in our community were well cared for. And I think that was a legacy of the strong labor movement in Northeast Ohio that enabled people to think about cross-racial class solidarity, that they cared about the most vulnerable among us in Northeast Ohio. And so now school millage rates, as you say, almost always pass, and one of the really interesting things there is that people often are led to think that, like, in the tax code or in government, there's this line called waste, fraud, and abuse, and we can just cut that line and that'll be fine. But what I thought was one of the bravest things I heard in Cleveland was when a superintendent got on the radio the day after Election Day and said, our taxes were just cut. We're cutting foreign language, we're cutting PE, we're cutting all of these enrichment activities that enrich our children's lives because we don't have the money to pay the teachers, and we're raising class sizes, by the way. We rarely hear that because superintendents are encouraged not to talk that way. It's negative. I think what we have to do is to explain to people that if we want a bright future, taxes are part of that. And I am very optimistic because this is the most educated, the most diverse, and the most progressive generation that is coming up now into voting ages now. And I just think we have to help them understand the vision of a vibrant country.
Well, thank you. This was great. We have learned now how to raise taxes on Americans and be happy. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. All right. Where is Chuck? There he is.
Right here.
Now, Chuck, rumor has it, so Chuck, you're a part of the Oscar Mayer family. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Rumor has it that you gave all your money away. So
it was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. Aren't most rich people really generous, and can't billionaires just, do most of this through charity? And, is that the way this is going to all shake out in the end?
Well, thanks, Jamal. And I'm glad to get to follow the tax discussion because when we talk about philanthropy, we really should think about it as a tax issue. And I think we've gotten a great discussion this morning about the key point of the Patriotic Millionaires, which is this extraordinary concentration of wealth and power is a threat to democracy, to economic stability, to our ecology. And the Patriotic Millionaires, teaming up with the Institute for Policy Studies, we're going to do a couple of reports in the coming weeks and months on the cost of billionaires to ordinary society. So I want to talk first about the cost of billionaires, billionaire philanthropy. And I'm curious, if, think about this. Imagine a billionaire gives $1 to charity. How much do you think you as taxpayers chip in toward that contribution? 30%? 30 cents? 50 cents? Here's the sneak preview of our cost of billionaire philanthropy report. 74 cents. So for every dollar a billionaire gives to charity, we as taxpayers chip in 74 cents in lost tax revenue. Now, how is this possible? How is this possible? Because billionaires not only are reducing their income tax, they're also reducing their estate taxes, their gift tax, their capital gains tax. So it's a huge subsidy. And the problem is the wealth doesn't just go directly to the charities. You like to think that this money is flowing to the charity recipient groups doing affordable housing or arts and culture or poverty alleviation. But actually, huge amounts of it are being diverted into, we call them intermediaries, private foundations, donor-advised funds that are essentially controlled by those donors. And those funds can sit parked for generations in these intermediaries. So the donors get an immediate tax reduction the year they give the money, but it can sit for a long time. What's the payout foundation for a private foundation? Anybody know the annual amount of a payout? 5%. But that also can include overhead, trustee compensation, and donations to donor-advised funds. Oh, by the way, a donor-advised fund, what's the payout for a donor-advised fund? 0. Meaning that you can put money into a donor-advised fund and you will get an immediate tax break, but there's no timetable. There's no requirement that those funds get paid out. So we're talking about subsidizing the warehousing of wealth, taxpayer subsidizing the warehousing of wealth in the charity sector. In 2020, Scott Wallace, one of our Patriotic Millionaire members, led a national campaign during the pandemic to increase foundation payout. He said, look, millions of people are dying around the world. The nonprofit sector is struggling. Let's get lawmakers to increase temporarily the payout from 5% to 10%. Let's require that donor-advised funds have a payout. Guess who opposed that? The Council of Foundations lobbied vigorously against this. The National Association of Community Foundations lobbied against this. If any of you have a donor-advised fund at a community foundation, ask them, why is it you're taking my funds and lobbying against bold charity reform with your money? Look, donor-advised fund, that's right. Let's talk about the most generous people in the philanthropy field. When you think about the billionaires who have pledged to give away half their money, the giving pledgers, right? The giving pledge started in 2010, and here's a sneak preview into part of our report. We looked at the 75 U.S. living billionaires who've taken the giving pledge. In 2010, they had about $350 billion combined. So 13 years later, where are we at? Have we seen half those funds go down? Have we seen, a third of them been given away? Actually, the wealth has gone up of that group to almost $900 billion. These are the people who have generously taken the giving pledge, and many of them have seen their wealth go up over 700%. So they have a problem, which is their wealth is growing faster than it's possible to give it away. So what will happen? Those funds, if they're going to fulfill their giving pledge, will go into private family foundations, and donor-advised funds. They will not move directly to the charities, most likely, and we will see intergenerational warehousing of charitable dollars. So that's kind of where we're at. We can't wait for the billionaires to voluntarily move this money to the charity sector. And that's why we advocate for a bold charity reform agenda that includes lawmakers saying, let's boost the payout, let's require donor-advised funds to have a payout, and let's have greater transparency in where those funds go. So Jamal, that's the cost of billionaire philanthropy.
All right, so you're saying billionaires aren't really that generous. Is that what you're saying?
They're saying that the system basically is giving people enormous tax breaks to warehouse wealth. There's a lot of generosity still happening, and there's a lot of generosity in this room, but it's not, the overall system is leading to warehousing of charitable money.
Are there any other ways that we're subsidizing billionaires?
There are so many, and that's why we're going to be doing these reports, because we're going to look at all the ways that we and taxpayers subsidize billionaires. But let me tell you one that really sort of bugs me a lot. Private jets. You're subsidizing the private jet travelers of this country. And there's lots of examples of this. We know that the Trump tax cuts cut taxes on private jet ownership. Remember last Christmas, around the Southwest Airlines had to cancel 3,000 flights, and the whole air traffic control system was completely bogged down. And at that time, here's one thing, that 1 out of 6 planes that take off is a private jet. And yet, only, so if they're chipping in for their share of the air traffic control system, you'd think, they should be paying about 16, 17% of the overall cost of the air traffic control system. The reality is that they pay about 2% of and that includes a bunch of airports, hundreds of airports around the country that have no commercial flights. They're all private aviation. But then there's the environmental cost to all of us on planet Earth. And as we know, the United Nations Climate Panel said, look, we need to radically move away from fossil fuels. Yet private jet travel, the 1% wealthiest travelers burn about half of the fossil fuels in aviation. And for every private jet passenger burns about 10 times the emissions of a commercial jet passenger. So there are lawmakers out there trying to say, let's make sure private jets pay their fair share and pay to offset the cost of emissions. And we want to, as an organization, we understand there's a lot of benefits to flying private, especially during the pandemic, the surge in private jets. But we think maybe it's time to discourage private jet use, and if not discourage it, at least make sure that private jets are paying their fair share. And to this, I'll look to my brother, board member of the Patriotic Millionaires, Stephen Prince. And Stephen, if you have a commentary on this. But
yeah, when I was a young man, I did inhale, but one thing I never did was cocaine. Because I'd always heard that cocaine was, if you ever did it, you'd never give it up. It's supposed to be that amazing. Now, honestly, I don't know because I never did it, but I'm going to tell you, flying on a private jet is like cocaine. It is the coolest method of travel I've ever experienced, and it's tough, but I'm kind of having a moment with my jet, and I'm really seriously considering selling it because I'm challenged to square my concern about the environment and my place in mankind to continue to be so phenomenally selfish to be able to get on a jet all by myself, for room for 7 or 8 more people in there. I'm in there all by myself except for the pilots, and I just don't think it's right. And I've got it for sale, so we'll see. But that's how I feel about it. It's an amazing thing, but don't do it if you don't want to continue to do it because it's hard to give up.
Well said. Thanks.
Unless it's Air Force Two, which is not that okay. You may have read in the paper. So thank you, Chuck. What I'm hearing today is billionaires don't pay taxes. They don't give away enough of their money, and their jets are polluting the earth. So what should we do to make this better? to help answer that question is Gabriela Sandoval, the Executive Director of the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. She's going to come up and give us some perspective.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank Erica and her fabulous team and all of you at the meeting today for welcoming me into your community and for writing me into the story of this fantastic event. My name is Gabriela Sandoval. I am, as you've heard, the inaugural Executive Director of the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute, or EWDI. I'm going to try something new by way of introducing myself, and maybe this will catch on. I am the product of policy, the youngest daughter of immigrants to this country who, had they not been reunited by the Immigration and Nationality Act, would not be here in front of you today. A product of the FHA loan that allowed my father to purchase my childhood home, but only in an unincorporated part of town, the Mexican part of town. A product of Head Start and food stamps, racially segregated but public schools, bilingual education, of Cal grants and Pell grants, and most recently, public service loan forgiveness. Surviving the vice grip of the generational sandwich experience of caring for elderly parents and parenting an adolescent with the invaluable support that my parents have received from Medicaid and Medicare, Social Security, IHSS. I'm the product of policy, and I'd venture to bet that so are you. And seductive though it might be to succumb to the fantasy that we are not, it is all by design. Economic inequality also exists by design. So EWDI's mission is to address the harms inflicted on our country and our world by the excessive concentration of wealth. Why excessive wealth? Because excessive wealth holds our government hostage, deforming our democracy, because excessive wealth is destroying our planet with its unsustainability, the carbon footprint of the ultra-wealthy, and the withholding of resources that could save us from climate catastrophe. And because excessive wealth is killing us, suffocating our communities, exacerbating structural inequalities that impact literally every aspect of our well-being. So I'm grateful for the 3 minutes to introduce myself to you all and to be a member of this community, and looking forward to complementing the efforts of the Patriotic Millionaires and all the organizations represented here. And I hope that you will join me in this fight against excessive wealth disorder as well. Thank you.
To bring us home, let's hear from Jeff Clements, the president of American Promise, about how to fix the corrupt campaign finance system that's rigged our economy for way too long. Jeff, you got an easy brief. Come on up and tell us about it.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Jamal. Hey, we've all been here for this wonderful morning together, but for a long time. So I'm going to try to bring it home, not get between you and lunch, with something that I think we are looking for, which is what's the most high leverage thing we can do to accelerate this incredibly building movement, and how do we do that? I would propose, and I'm going to leave you with an invitation to those who are not already with us at American Promise. Several of you are, so thank you, to join this growing movement to amend the U.S. Constitution, as we have always done before, to systemically open the door to the kind of reform that we're talking about today. So let me say more about it quickly in 3 minutes. The meeting this morning was American Promise, the money part. We spent a lot of time talking about money, of course. But let's be clear, when we're talking about money, we're talking about power, right? We're talking about power. The Crack the Code report that you have with you, that was on your seats this morning, the top 100 wealthiest among us, some of those that Chuck was talking about, have 60,000 times as much political power as everybody else. So concentrated wealth is concentrated power. It's wrong, it's dangerous, and Americans know it. That's the key. Americans know it. We saw that in Whiteville, I think, with those conversations. 7 out of 10 Americans say our democracy is under dire threat. The number one reason, 86% of those cross the partisan spectrum, no difference, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, 86% say the reason is money in politics. And, you know, people used to say, oh, well, Americans don't care about that. They might get pissed off or whatever, but they don't really care about campaign finance. 86% say it's the number one threat to our democracy. More than political violence, more than election denialism, money in politics. And you know what? They're right. They are right. Whether it's exploding trains, toxic water, an economy that lurches from bailout to bailout, Americans experience this problem. They know it. Billions of dollars flow from the elite donors to political operatives to the monopolistic media companies. And what does most of that money go to? It goes to tear us apart. It goes to divide us. It goes to make us hate the other side, the enemy, whatever that might be. And so it makes solutions hard. So what do we do about it? What do we do with the billions of dollars, the dysfunctional, horribly divided system, to beat the money power threat? How do we win? How do we reform a new America? We do it how we've always done it. We go to the document, to the Constitution itself. That's what works. That's what has always worked. That's the only thing that works when you're really talking about power. And so let's look at it. Again and again, that is what the American people have done in conditions just like ours. When we exercise our right to amend the Constitution, we win. When we don't, we get where we are right now. We would have no Constitution as we know it without Americans exercising our right to amend the Constitution. No Bill of Rights, no equal protection of the laws, no right to vote for women, for people of color, for young Americans, and no, by the way, progressive income tax. That one's on there as well. We needed a constitutional amendment to get a progressive income tax. So let's not delude ourselves. It's hard. People will say, right, we're going to amend the Constitution. Sure, we don't do that anymore. All of that. But let's not delude ourselves. If we don't amend the Constitution, power will not balance itself. Never has, never will. So why do we need it? The Supreme Court has blown up the guardrails between money and power. Right? The Supreme Court has stripped Americans of the right to regulate election money, except what goes directly to the campaigns. They'll tell you, oh, there's a $3,300 limit to the campaigns. That's a joke, and most political donors know it is, and most candidates know it is. That's the tip of the iceberg. If you think about the iceberg metaphor, the dangerous part, the massive part, is under the water. Right? That's the part that's coming in from foreign entities, from global corporations, from every billionaire that wants to control Congress or the White House or your local school committee or district attorney. Without a constitutional solution, this gets much worse. So it's not an option. It's an obligation of us. It's an obligation of every American, whether Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, the one I heard this morning, hate them all. It's an obligation of every American. And fortunately, there's a place we can go. That's what American Promise was created for. We brought it together just a few years ago. It's sweeping the nation, I would say, and Americans are responding. We have a state-by-state, local, networked-based strategy that's scaling up. And 22 states have now formally gotten on board. We're driving to get the vote. 2/3 of Congress, it's what we'll need. Ratification in 38 states. So it's happening. And so for everyone listening today in this room or around the country, let's commit to doing what it really takes, for real, to address the clear and present danger that America faces in this battle of political money, in this battle for our right to power in this society for all of us. We Americans are more powerful than money if we realize we are not the enemy of each other. We're more powerful than money when we come together to defend the Constitution. And we are more powerful and able to realize the promise of America and lift every voice and free every American to actually have a shot at a new American dream that we can write together if we get on board this constitutional amendment, as we've always done in prior history. So join us at AmericanPromise.net, and we'll see you at lunch.
Wow. Money and power. A story as old as time itself. And we can write a better story for the next 250 years of our American democratic capitalism. We've learned a lot today. I just want to make one other remark here, too. You've seen our video of what we're doing in North Carolina. You've seen Kat doing her work. You've seen those people eating those seafood, fried seafood at Dale's. But that cost money. That's what you guys have been providing, our members. The money that not only paid for those seafood restaurants, not only paid for the airfare to bring people in and out, and those orange t-shirts they were wearing at the beginning, but also this organization has gone from Erica Payne hiring a bunch of kids, high school students, even my son 15 years ago, to do this, to now having a bunch of professionals being paid enough to actually earn a living, supporting their own kids. We have 4 people on our staff who are parents, I think, maybe a couple I don't know about. And that is amazing in my view, just what you guys, who we've recruited over the years, have been providing the money to pay for. And I want to say thank you. And I want to thank our team, Jody, Beck, Sam, Renee, Deveria, Dylan, Kat, Adam, Bob, Gabby, Stephen, Emily. You guys have been the most fun to work with, and I've been having the most fun I have in any job I've ever had. So we've learned a lot today, and I hope that you all have had a good time too.
Thank you, Morris. And I do want to just say one thing that, and I don't know if this is going to come across good or bad, but when I sold my company 4 years ago, I put a fairly substantial amount of money into a donor advised fund. And by the end of this year, I will have depleted it all. I will have given it all away. Which is the one it was really designed to do. It was not designed to sit in a bank somewhere in some sort of investment fund and leave to your children. It was meant to be given away to organizations who needed the money. And as I have other transactions in the future, I'm going to put more money in there and do it all over again. I tell my children all the time, if somebody came along and said, Stephen, you can give it all away, if you can fix America's problems. And I tell my children all the time, you wouldn't inherit anything. I'd give every penny away, because America matters more than we as individuals. So I want to say that. I want to thank all of you for being here. I hope that you've learned something today. And just if you want to learn more and stay in touch with us, just go to patrioticmillionaires.org and stay with us. We've got a lot to do. Thank you.